I thought she was just being nice, smiling that way at me, brushing past with her usual grace. But something about it lingered longer than it should have. Maybe it was the bookstore. Narrow aisles, the scent of old paper mingling with coffee from the tiny cafe corner, the kind of place where people usually keep their heads down. She stood near the poetry section, one hand resting on the shelf, her other holding a half-open notebook. I don't even know why I noticed the way her sleeve fell, the faint crease of her wrist, or the way her hair caught the afternoon light like it was trying to tell me something. She wasn't trying to tell me anything. She had that confidence people talk about but never really see, like she could read the room without looking, and yet, right then, she glanced at me. Just for a second, long enough that I could feel it like an electric pulse running from my chest to my toes. I was shelving some new arrivals nearby, fumbling with a stack of dog-eared novels, pretending not to stare. She caught me anyway. Her smile wasn't warm or casual. It was layered, something teasing, maybe a little sharp, like she knew a joke I hadn't heard yet. I felt my cheeks heat up, my fingers slipping over the bindings, and she noticed. She tilted her head slightly, and that small movement felt deliberate. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice refused to form. There was a lull in the air, a silence that pressed against the ceiling of the shop like it wanted to wrap us both in it. And then she offered me a pen from her bag without a word. Not a real pen, just some cheap, plastic thing she happened to have. But the gesture made me feel like she had seen me, all of me, in that tiny moment. She walked away before I could thank her properly, and I kept watching, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But even as she blended into the aisles, moving with that quiet certainty, I couldn't. Her presence lingered. I could still feel it around the corners of the shelves, as if the bookstore itself had shifted to make room for her. I replayed the glance, the smile, the tilt of her head. I knew I shouldn't have. She was older, experienced, layered in ways I couldn't even guess, but I couldn't help it. Something unspoken had passed between us, and I had no idea what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. And yet, I knew one thing. I couldn't stop thinking about that small act of kindness, the way her fingers had brushed mine for just a second, and how in that second, I felt like someone had finally seen me. Even now, standing at the edge of the poetry section, I wondered if she'd noticed that I noticed, or if it had just been my imagination. But I couldn't shake the pull of her smile. It was the kind that asks a question you're not sure you're ready to answer. I found her in the cafe corner of the bookstore a few days later, hunched over her notebook as if the words inside could weigh her down. She didn't notice me at first. I think she liked it that way, the quiet space where she could exist without explanation. I slid into the chair across from her, pretending I'd just happened to be there, though really, I'd been hoping for this. Still scribbling away? I asked, my voice careful, like it might shatter something fragile if I pushed too hard. She glanced up, and for a heartbeat, her guarded wall flickered. Not completely down, just thin cracks. Her eyes softened, though the brief pause said more than words ever could. Trying, she said, voice low, almost a whisper but steady. Then she went back to her page, pen moving quickly, almost violently. I watched her, noticing things I couldn't explain. The way her fingers tightened around the pen when she paused, the soft exhale that made her shoulders slump for just a second, the faint lines around her eyes that seemed to deepen when she laughed, even at herself. There was a tiredness to her today, subtle, but present, like she'd carried more than her share of the world before breakfast. I wanted to ask if she needed help, but something in her posture told me not to. She wasn't cold, far from it, but she wasn't giving me an invitation either. I learned that some kind of energy passes between people when one is vulnerable and the other is careful, hovering on the edges. I didn't move closer. I didn't speak too much. I just let myself notice. When her pen finally paused, she rubbed her temples lightly and let out a short, almost embarrassed sigh. I wanted to say, it's okay, but even that seemed too much. Instead, I picked up her coffee cup, pretending to offer it across the table. Here, I said, voice quiet. Her eyes met mine. That slow, measured look again. The one that makes it impossible to tell if she's amused, tired, or testing me. Then she smiled, a tiny thing, hesitant but real. She took the cup, fingers brushing mine for a brief, electric second. My stomach did that stupid, desperate flutter thing, and I caught myself staring longer than I should have. She laughed softly, almost nervously, shaking her head like she wanted to shake away the tension she'd just let slip. "Thanks," she murmured. There was no warmth in the word, not really, but enough. Enough that it wrapped around something inside me I didn't know existed yet. We sat in that quiet corner for a while longer, the hum of the cafe washing around us, each of us lost in our own worlds yet tethered by some unspoken current. Every so often, her eyes would flick up at me, a brief acknowledgement, and I felt it, something forbidden, fragile, and thrilling. And then she leaned back, just a little, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and I realized I was holding my breath. The pull between us wasn't obvious, but it was there, gentle, insistent, impossible to ignore. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't even know if she knew it existed. But for that single moment, the space between us felt alive in a way nothing else ever had. It was late, later than I should have stayed in the bookstore, but neither of us seemed to notice. The rain tapped against the windows in slow, uneven rhythms, drumming a kind of anxious pulse into the quiet space around us. I was stacking returned books while she lingered near the poetry shelves, idly flipping through a slim volume of Neruda. Somehow, we ended up close. Closer than I'd intended. She leaned over to reach for a book on a higher shelf, and our elbows brushed. The spark of contact was ridiculous and electric. I felt it all the way down to my fingers, my stomach twisting in ways I didn't want to admit. "Careful," I said, voice low. I meant the shelf, but I might have meant her, too. She glanced at me, a flicker of amusement crossing her face, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I know what I'm doing," she said softly, but the slight tremor in her hand betrayed her composure. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, or maybe just to feel the warmth of her proximity a second longer, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, and the spell broke. A friend calling about some trivial thing I couldn't care less about, and I had to step away. When I returned, she had pulled the book down and moved a step back, deliberately, like she'd just remembered some invisible rule. We settled into silence, stacking books side by side, the sound of rain filling the gaps between us. I noticed the lines of exhaustion under her eyes, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear with a slightly shaky hand, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the must of old pages. She looked exposed, but not completely, like she was daring me to notice, yet guarding herself at the same time. Then her phone rang. She glanced at it, hesitated, and stepped away to answer, her voice barely above a whisper. The conversation was distant, the words muffled, but the tension returned instantly. A reminder of the outside world, the rules we couldn't yet break. I felt the distance widen and shrank back, biting my lip, unsure if I should speak, move closer, or simply stay still. When she returned, she didn't meet my eyes immediately. She leaned against the shelf, arms crossed loosely, and there was a quiet pause, as if the rain had stopped too, leaving only this suspended moment between us. I wanted to say something, confess that the brush of her elbow had lingered in my mind, that her presence made the air itself feel heavy, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I adjusted a book on the top shelf, pretending it mattered more than it did. She watched me for a second, then leaned closer, ostensibly to reach a book behind me, and our shoulders brushed again. That second contact lasted longer, enough for my pulse to spike, my fingers to twitch. I imagined all the things I could do, all the ways I wanted to cross that line, but I didn't. Not yet. When she straightened up, stepping back this time with deliberate care, I felt both relief and disappointment. The storm outside raged harder, and I realized it didn't matter. The electricity between us had already settled into something stubborn, and neither of us would acknowledge it yet. And as she gave me a small, fleeting smile before turning back to her notebook, I stood frozen, hand resting on a book I no longer needed to hold, wondering if she felt it too. This almost, not quite moment suspended in time. I never realized how loud silence could be until that night. We were closing up the bookstore, the last few customers gone, shelves dim under the fading overhead lights. Rain still pressed against the windows, a steady, relentless murmur that seemed to fill every empty corner. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, tapping her pen idly on a notebook I hadn't noticed before. I stood nearby, trying to busy myself with organizing returned books, but my fingers felt heavy, clumsy, as if every movement was too loud. Finally, she broke the silence, not with words I expected, but with the kind of question that lands like a stone in your chest. "What are we doing?" Her voice was low, uneven, like she'd been asking herself that question for days. I froze. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer was complicated, messy, impossible, something I wasn't ready to articulate even to myself. I don't know," I said finally, almost whispering it, though my heart thumped as if it were shouting. She let that hang between us. A long pause. Her eyes, normally so guarded, held mine, and I saw something raw there. Confusion, frustration, longing, maybe even a little fear. She wasn't looking for an answer. She was asking to be seen. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, but my hands stayed by my sides. Every instinct screamed, but logic, her logic, my logic, kept me rooted. Maybe we shouldn't pretend this is normal anymore," I said. She exhaled slowly, lips parting just enough to let the sound escape. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think we've been pretending for too long." And then the silence came back, heavier than before. Only now it wasn't just the quiet of the empty bookstore. It was the weight of everything unspoken, of every glance, every brush of a hand, every hesitation that had brought us here. I watched her tilt her head slightly, staring at the edge of the counter like she was trying to see the answer reflected in it. I couldn't look away. Every line of her face seemed etched with contradictions, strength and fatigue, confidence and vulnerability. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her that none of this mattered, that I'd follow her anywhere, that the rules and the fear didn't mean a thing, but I didn't. Words wouldn't capture it. Instead, I stepped a little closer, close enough that the air between us seemed to vibrate with unspoken truths. She didn't step back, didn't flinch. And in that stretch of time, I realized we weren't pretending anymore, whether we wanted to admit it or not. Finally, she leaned back against the counter, lowering her gaze to the floor, and in the softest, most shattering way, she said, "I don't even know who I am when you're here." The words hung in the air, fragile and explosive at the same time. I swallowed hard. Everything I wanted to say, everything I feared to feel, condensed into a single, sharp ache that left me frozen, my mind replaying her voice, her glance, the way she let herself be seen in that one devastating moment. I found her sitting at the small table near the back of the cafe, rain still pattering against the windows, though now it felt like it belonged to both of us. She had a worn envelope in front of her, edges frayed, like it had been carried for years. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should disturb her, but she looked up anyway, eyes wary, almost apologetic. I wasn't going to tell anyone," she started, voice low, careful. "Not even me, sometimes." She paused, tracing the edge of the envelope with her finger. "It's from him. From years ago." The mention of someone else made my stomach tighten, a familiar ache I couldn't ignore. "Him?" I asked, almost too quietly. She nodded. "My first, real mistake. The one I never got over completely. I kept thinking I'd fixed it, moved on, but..." Her gaze fell, distant, as if she could see the memory like a film playing on the walls behind her eyes. "Some things don't get fixed. They just settle inside you." I wanted to say something comforting, but words felt clumsy, like they would only make the room smaller. Instead, I just watched her, noticing the tiny tremble in her hands, the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her breath caught as she opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photograph, edges curling slightly, a note in handwriting she'd never forget. She didn't show it to me, just held it close, and I realized, maybe for the first time, that her past had shadowed her life longer than I'd imagined. I reached for my coffee cup and sipped, pretending to be busy, though my mind was spinning. I remembered something she had said earlier, laughing softly about a friend she had lost in a different lifetime, and suddenly everything felt connected. The guardedness, the pauses, the smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were all traces of someone who had loved and lost, someone who had survived, but not without carrying pieces of that pain with her. She looked up, meeting my eyes again, and I caught a flash of vulnerability I wasn't supposed to see. Her shoulders hunched slightly, almost apologetic, as if the weight of sharing even a sliver of her history was too much. I don't even know why I'm showing you this," she admitted. "Maybe because I don't know who else would understand. Or maybe because I wanted to see if someone could notice me without flinching." I blinked, unsure what to say. Flinching wasn't in my nature, not for her, not now. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I could hold the pieces she carried, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, and she seemed to accept that as an answer. For a long moment, we just sat there, the room quiet except for the rain, her breathing uneven, my heart ticking too fast. And then, almost imperceptibly, she tucked the photograph back into the envelope and pressed it against her chest, like it was both a shield and an offering. "You noticed," she whispered. Not a question, not really. Just a statement, fragile as glass. I wanted to tell her I had, that I had noticed everything. But I didn't. I just watched her, feeling the seismic shift inside me that came not from words, but from the sheer honesty of her being exposed, even for a fraction of a second. And in that quiet, charged moment, I realized the world had tilted just slightly off its axis, and neither of us would be the same again. We didn't speak for a while after she set the envelope aside, not because the tension had evaporated, but because it had transformed into something quieter, heavier, more unavoidable. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet fill the space between us, and she did the same. The cafe had emptied. Only the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant patter of rain remained. Her gaze drifted over my shoulder, then back to mine, soft but unflinching. I didn't have to ask the question. We both knew the truth we'd been circling for weeks. The gravity between us, the pull that had grown out of every brush of hands, every stolen glance. She exhaled slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips, the kind that held resignation and relief at the same time. "We can't pretend anymore," she said quietly, not accusing, not pleading, just stating a fact. I nodded, the words I wanted to say sticking in my throat. Love, desire, everything that had been building, it didn't need a label. We didn't need to define it aloud. We just needed to exist in it. I noticed the way her hand rested on the edge of the table, fingers lightly brushing against mine. I didn't move first, just let the connection linger, tentative, fragile. She made the first move, resting her hand over mine. Not gripping, not demanding, just there. Solid, quiet. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of her presence, the comfort, the warmth, the subtle electricity that had been threading through every interaction. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm, and I realized she had always been watching, noticing, understanding in ways I hadn't even known I needed. We sat like that for a while, not speaking, letting the rain and the empty cafe fill in the rest. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of acknowledgement, trust, and an unspoken agreement that we'd stop hiding from the inevitable pull between us. I felt the small pressure of her fingers against mine, the slightest lean of her shoulder toward mine, and it was enough. Enough to confirm that we were both willing to step into this carefully, slowly, without words. The world outside could wait. This, right here, was what mattered. She shifted slightly, resting her forehead against the back of my hand. I closed my eyes for a moment, tasting the quiet finality of the gesture. Not love proclaimed, not hearts confessed, just presence. Just the two of us, together, acknowledged, and complete in that one small, human moment. When I opened my eyes, she was smiling faintly again, the corners of her lips soft, eyes still searching mine. No words, no promises, just the undeniable truth that neither of us could walk away, not really. And in that gentle, quiet space, I realized that some connections didn't need a declaration. They just needed recognition, patience, and the courage to finally let them be. I never thought a single smile or the brush of a hand could change the way I moved through the world, but it did. Sitting here now, weeks later, in the same corner of the cafe where it all began, I realize how quietly she rewrote the rules for me. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations, but with presence, patience, and a willingness to let the connection grow without forcing it. She's different now, too. Not because anything about her changed fundamentally, but because she stopped carrying the weight of old mistakes alone. There's a lightness to her that wasn't there before, subtle but undeniable, in the way she laughs without glancing over her shoulder, in the way her hands move freely instead of tensing with memories. For me, it's been learning to notice, to slow down, to accept that some things don't need a name to be real. The fear, the hesitation, the uncertainty, they didn't vanish. But they found a place alongside trust, curiosity, and that inexplicable pull that drew me closer to her, day by day, gesture by gesture. We still sit side by side in silence sometimes, hands brushing accidentally or on purpose, reading or writing, or just existing in the same space. And in those quiet moments, I feel everything I was too timid to admit before. Not a fairy tale love, not perfection, but something far more human, far more real. It's strange to think how one small act, a smile, a glance, a shared coffee, can ripple outward and reshape your understanding of connection, intimacy, and courage. I carry it with me in ways I didn't expect, tucked into the corners of everyday life, reminding me that love doesn't have to shout to matter. She catches me looking sometimes, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "You still think too much." And I smile back, because I do, and because it's okay. Because now, I know that what we have is alive, fragile, and ours, and that's enough. The story isn't over. It will never be completely over. But that's the point. Some connections aren't meant to be neatly tied up. They're meant to be felt, moment by moment, and remembered when it matters most. And so, I sit here, coffee in hand, watching her scribble in her notebook, her hair catching the late afternoon light, and I let myself be completely present. Not thinking about what comes next, not worrying about what should happen. I just exist with her, and that is more than enough. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?